Through the mud, the blood, and the beer. This is the Outside Gate with Steve Hall on the L4 Media Network. We're talking US Moto and anywhere the conversation goes. Joining us today is the man behind the Motocross Vault. If you haven't heard of the Motocross Vault, then you must be pretty young, and you better go and check it out and have a look at what your dad used to ride. It's Tony Blazier. How are you, man?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. So I was just talking to Tony there, and there's rain pouring down on my tin roof of my house. So hopefully that's not going to upset the audio. But yeah, we're an all-weather show, so that's it.
There you go. Got to roll with the punches.
We've got to roll with it. Yeah. So Tony was he was an inspiration to me when I very first did anything to do with motocross media, which was my Instagram page. And I was an old school, I don't need social media sort of guy. And my mates were like, oh, you got to at least get Facebook, you know? And one of the first things I find was Tony's site. And I thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. There's more pictures and cool stuff on here than all my magazines, you know? And I started to realize, you know, this social media is not so bad. And told my mates to follow Tony's page and that sort of thing. And then eventually decided, oh, I've got a lot of old Aussie magazines, and started doing a bit of the same thing with my page. So I thank Tony for that just before, but I thought I'd just share that at the start of the show. Also, Tony does he writes for Pulp, does the classic steel columns on Pulp, as well as his own stuff. Has a t-shirt, Motocross Vault t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing that you can buy as well, where he does some really cool pictures, you know, old trucks with old bikes in the back and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I'll shut up for a second, let Tony talk a bit about what he does.
Well, actually, I do all that stuff like you said. I have a YouTube channel, the Motocross Vault as well, where I kind of do video essays similar to what I do for Steve with Classic Steel. I've been doing that since about 2012. Steve asked me to start writing for him over at Pulp MX, and I kind of do retrospectives on classic motocross stuff. I love racing today as well, you know, but it's going to be known as my niche. I think because I had such a huge collection of magazines. I didn't start out that way thinking that was what I was going to do. In fact, I almost got rid of them a little over a decade ago. And then I thought, well, maybe I could go through and start maybe scanning some of these photos, because, you know, I knew I had a huge collection of stuff, and I thought it might be fun to share that with people. And what I think initially what I started doing was just putting them on Vital MX. I would just post pictures and stuff on there, and that just kind of snowballed over time. And that's, you know, kind of where Steve reached out to me. And then I built, you know, I got on social media. Like you said, I wasn't really big into social. I wasn't early on Twitter or any of that stuff, but I thought, again, it would be fun to share the things I have, because I know so many people, you know, I'm 54. I know a lot of people who grew up in my era in the 70s and 80s. You know, they probably had these magazines, but most people, they don't keep the things. You know, you read it, you throw it in the trash, who knows what happened to it. I just happened to keep the stuff. And I thought there'd be, you know, a market out there for people who wanted to see this kind of stuff and kind of relive those old pictures. And I enjoyed, I got a lot of positive feedback on it. You know, initially, I also have a huge selection of VHS tapes of races going back to the early 80s. And I started kind of uploading those to my YouTube channel too. And it all kind of, got my name out there a little bit as somebody who had a lot of classic motocross stuff. And that's kind of just been where my focus has been with most of my content.
Yeah, awesome. And your day job, Tony, you're a Chevy dealer, is that right?
Yeah. Actually, I work for GMC now. Same thing, General Motors here in America. But yeah, I'm a sales manager at a GMC store. I've been doing that for like 29 years. So that's my day job. This has always been just a hobby on the side. You know, it's not a permanent job. I don't make really much of any money from what I do. Steve pays me a little bit, and I get a little stuff in the merch, like you said, just enough to make it kind of worth my time to spend the hours I do. But it's always been more of a passion project, just for fun, you know.
Yeah, cool. Hey, I've just been watching. Well, I got everything set up for the show earlier on, and then I've been meaning to watch. I just watched the video of Carson Brown and Ken Roxon on the RM85s. Have you seen that yet?
I did. I watched that yesterday. Actually, I tweeted it out. That was really awesome.
How
Awesome to
good
watch.
was that?
Carson
That
is
was
so amazing to watch. I love the variety
yeah,
of bikes he rides. One day he'll be on a like a RMA. The next day he's on a 79, YZ100 or something. It's
yeah.
awesome watching him ride those old bikes.
He's really carved out a niche for himself, hasn't he?
He really has. He really has. Yeah.
It is super cool. And that was I loved that. That was great. It actually reminded me of talking vintage. My favorite dirt bike video is one that most people wouldn't expect, but Doug Dubark on his YZ100. That video it's probably from about 5-6 years ago. Have you ever seen that one?
I haven't. Like he did this on a restored one and riding it at Glen Helen or someplace.
Yeah. Nah, it's like a natural terrain race. So it was a thing. Geez, I'm saying 5-6 years ago, man. It could be 10. Yeah. As you get older, it all you think something was a few years ago, but it was quite a few.
Right.
It was even featured in Dirt Bike magazine.
How did I miss this? I'd love to see this.
And so Doug built a YZ100, and that was basically a whole field of YZ100s, and there was, I forget, but some pretty fast guys, and they were doing this race, and Dr. D had the GoPro on, and it's my favorite thing. Yeah. There's no big jumps. There's no big crowd, nothing like that. It's just like this natural terrain track. And there's the doctor just working this YZ100 like it's And there's the RM85 thing I just watched. It sort of had those sort of feels that I love the a lot of people sort of love big bores, and who doesn't love a big bore? I love a CR 500, a KX500. But a 125, or even better if it's 100 on full song, getting ridden to its absolute limit is still my favorite thing.
I've had every size of bike you can get, and I still prefer riding the smaller bikes. I think it's more fun even though you're maybe not going as fast, you feel fast because you're just pinning it everywhere. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. It gives someone who's not super talented a chance to feel a little talented, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. Yeah, they're just fun to ride, And you can't beat the two-stroke sound, even though the four-strokes are better in every measurable way. The two-stroke still you can't beat that sound and the smell and everything else that comes with it.
The sound and the smell.
It's just awesome.
What oil do you run in your two-strokes? What's the oil that you like?
Usually I run Blinzol or Maxima 927. I like something that gives it a little bit of that castor bean oil smell,
Yeah. And is that what you ran when you were young? Is that smell still sort of make you reminisce?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I probably ran Yamalube R mostly because that's what we had at the local Yamaha shop. Is what we get.
Yeah.
I was going for what was inexpensive and readily available. But as you get older, you can be a little more picky on what you run in your bikes and stuff. So I just wanted to, whatever the cheapest thing was, probably what I ran when I was like in my teenage years.
Yeah, my very first two-stroke was a YZ125, and it's funny you hear me saying YZ. That's a hard habit to get out of because I know you guys say
my articles sometimes.
You guys say YZ, but it's funny, man, because in Australia, it's just we say Z.
Right. Right.
I always remember back to hearing because even though we say Z, we all watched Sesame Street growing up. That was a staple in Australia, and they'd be doing the alphabet, and then they'd be saying Z, and you'd be like, I remember as a kid thinking, why are they saying that? But
exactly.
my YZ, when I first bought it, I bought it secondhand, and the guy said he'd been running Castrol in it. And I thought, I'll just run the same thing. So I found out where to buy the Castrol and went and bought that. And I still run Castrol to this day just because of the smell.
You can't beat the smell. You can't beat the smell. It's the coolest part about it for sure. Yeah.
It just, and I know the smell that well that I can tell if I walk past another bike in the pits and then I can tell, he's got Castrol in that, So,
absolutely. Yeah. It's very distinctive.
Yeah. So yeah, love that, man. Love that.
stuff like that always triggers the memories, smells and things. When you smell it, you're like the same thing. If I get, open up an old carburetor full of old gas, and it's like, it reminds me of my childhood, like getting a bike and restoring it. Like, oh, that smell, it just brings back memories,
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote an article a couple of years ago now about, and it wasn't an anti-electric bike article. It was just an article on some things that you miss out on I mean, I am anti-electric bike, but I can't help but I wasn't like bashing that scene, but I was just sort of making a point about part of the attraction to the sport, especially for our vintage, is the smells and the sounds.
Yep, absolutely.
Not just the look, and even the smells and the sounds when you ride a two-stroke. That's all the senses are in play,
Yeah.
And that's something that an electric machine can never replicate.
No, I mean, is there any sound better than listening to Jeremy McGrath go through a set of whoops? It's just an awesome sound. It just is. And a four-stroke can't really capture, and an electric bike surely can. It's just going zzz, 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 zzz. That's all you hear. So
yeah, the chain slapping. Yeah,
that's about all you hear. Yeah, exactly. It's the chain, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Cool. So I've got some topics, man. I did say to you, the show's very organic.
Okay.
Especially when we're talking old school stuff, man. We're just bench racing, But I just got some topics just to go over, just some cool sort of stuff.
Okay.
I think maybe what was your first bike?
Ooh, the first bike I had was actually not a great machine as far as excitement goes. It was a Trail 90, a Honda, like the old step through 90s, which actually the new Trail 125 looks just like my first motorcycle.
Yep.
And I rode the crap out of that until I let my stepbrother ride it, and he jumped it, and it ripped the electricals out of it, and that was the end of that. It was, it was not a powerhouse, but it was a fun, like it would kind of go anywhere. Had like a low range transmission, high low, and you could, grandy it around. It was good for trail riding and stuff. So that was my first, quote unquote dirt bike. My parents were not into motorcycling at all. They wouldn't. I remember going to the Yamaha shop when I was probably 11 or 12 and begging my dad to get me like a YZ80 and stuff. And he was like, no, you'll kill yourself on that stuff. So it wasn't until I was a little older and I could spend my own money on stuff. So I didn't get any kind of motorcycle at all until I was like 16. And I didn't have a real motocross bike until I was probably 17 or 18. My first quote unquote real motocross bike was a 1978 CR250R Elsinore that I picked up. This is probably 1987 or so for like $250, which I wish I still had it. It'd be worth 10 times that now. But
that's right.
It was an awesome. That was an eye-opening experience going from like a trail bike to that thing. I about killed myself on it many times, but it was a really cool bike. It was a hell of a machine, and that was my first experience of what a real two-stroke was like. I was like, oh my God, the second time I got on it, I just looped it out and I was like, holy Christ, this thing's got a lot of power.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, those trail 90s, man, they were, they ran the farming communities of Australia for 15 years, and then them and the 125 version, and and then we had the automatic 200. We called them CTs. We called them CTs over CT 90, and the Aussie ones had a huge rack on the back that you could put a bale of hay, and you put two bales of hay and a dog on top on the back of them if you needed to.
Yeah, my 90 did too. It had like a rack. There was no back seat, but there was a rack back there that, of course, everybody would sit on. But it was. They were made for delivering noodles across Tokyo or something, I think, initially.
Yeah, that's right. And
they're great machines. Like I'm at them to get a new one just because of the nostalgia of the damn things. It looks just like it.
Yeah, and then also in Australia, those 90s progressed to eventually to a 110, and then the postal service here, Australia Post, picked them up, and they became those things delivered the mail here in Australia for 30 years.
Sure.
And they're lovingly actually known more so than a CT 110. They're just known as a postie bike. If you say a postie bike, everyone knows you're talking about a CT 110.
Honda probably sold more of those things than just about any other machine in history. They built them, I think, versions of the dang thing since the 50s.
They would
They're
have,
really, really, really versatile bikes, from all in the developing world. People, that was their main mode of transportation, is those little bikes like that. So they're
yeah,
good,
they're a
reliable machines.
bit of a cult thing. There's even like, I don't know if it's
Yeah.
still going, but there was a bunch of guys were riding them across the desert in Australia and doing these big desert trips. They'd
Really?
put a
Oh,
big tank on the front of
damn.
them and panniers and everything, and they'd go and do these crazy adventures. Crossing the Simpson Desert and things like that
Sure.
on these 110s. And she's a slow trip, but you know
Yeah.
the things aren't going to break down because they're.
Yeah.
It's
It's
one
not
thing I
going to get away
always say.
from you from power either. So you don't have to worry about
Yeah,
that. So,
yeah. They say if nuclear war ever breaks out, the only thing that'll be left will be the cockroaches. I disagree. It'll be
yeah.
cockroaches and it'll be little Honda 4-strokes will be the only
Yep. You're
things left
probably right
behind
about that. Yep.
because
Just running and running. The million
any of
miles
those
on
little
it.
two valve Honda 4-stroke motors, those
Yeah.
things, you can run them without oil for a week and put some oil back in, and they'll just be fine. They're
Keep
just
on trucking. Yeah,
amazing.
exactly right.
Yeah, like I said, they ran the farms of Australia until pretty much until your farm four wheelers really, your farm quads took off, um, and sort of took over from the little Honda ag bikes. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. And so you already said you wish you kept your 78
Yeah.
CR250.
Yeah.
What other bikes do you wish you'd kept?
Oh my God. I have added them all up over time. I've had over 50 motorcycles in my life, and I got a late start too. So I've had a lot of them. I would love to keep that 78. I had an 87 CR125. I really wish I still had that, just 'cause I'd love to find
Mm,
another one to restore. One of my
yeah.
favorite bikes, actually, I wish I kept too, much like your KX, like in the background. I had in 96, I had an RM250 and an RM125 brand new. And I really love that 125. I wish I'd kept it. That bike now. That thing had maybe the best suspension of any motorcycle I've ever ridden. That thing, those forks. That was the year they went back to the right side up forks,
Yeah, that was a
and they worked
96, you said?
so well. 96, yeah.
A 96,
It,
yeah.
yeah. The motor it was not super fast. I was at the time. I think I'd had a CR125 before that, and it wasn't definitely the motor definitely wasn't as powerful on top. But it had good mid range, good low. It was snappy, fun to ride. It was just a fun to ride motorcycle. That's been my experience with a lot of Suzukis I've had. They're rarely the fastest bikes I've owned, but they're just fun bikes to ride. They have the way the power works, and they come on snappy, fun. Just just a fun bike to ride. And a lot of times I was never, even when I raced all the time, I never had dreams about going pro. It was all about the fun. So
Yeah.
a lot of times the more fun a bike is more important to me than like how fast it is, or how great it is on the track. It's not necessarily the most important thing. And that's one of the bikes I really loved. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. 96, man. 96 was a really good vintage for bikes, wasn't it? Like, yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a
Like that.
96 CR250 too. That was a great machine
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Iconic bike, with Jeremy McGrath and stuff.
Yeah. What's your favorite 90s bike? Like, of just all 90s bikes. Is that it? Is it the 96 CR?
I think it's probably my favorite, that as far as the soft spot in my heart, is probably my 1990. I had a 125, 500, and 250 in 1990, and that's the one I probably had the most success racing on
Yep.
when I was younger, and so I won my first race on that bike, and I had it for a couple of years, and I love that, even though the real knock on that machine was the suspension was pretty crappy on all three of them. I got to revalve multiple times, and I was always fiddle with them, never could get it just right. But the motors on those bikes, and that Honda just had just awesome engines in that era. And I
Mm.
remember that, especially that 250, the power band was like a mile wide. It was never not on the power band, it seemed like, and you could
Yeah.
scream it or lug it or rev it, and it handled great, and I love the looks of it. So as far as, was it the best bike in the 90s? No, of course it wasn't. I don't think it was. Maybe one of the later Kawasaki's are probably one of the best, bikes in terms of performance. But for my personal, experience, that 1990s probably got the softest spot in my heart, as far as the bike I enjoyed the most and had the most success riding personally.
Yeah, it's like we were talking a little bit before we were on air. We were talking just sometimes it's the memories of a bike that makes you
Right.
love it. Like my
Yep.
96 KX, we were talking like I hated that purple one, and back then I thought, what the hell are they doing with this purple?
It's so terrible,
And
especially on the 500 where the tank and stuff is purple. Is like, oh my god,
it's
looks so good,
terrible.
so
And
strange.
but then I ended up getting a 96, and I really just got that because the price was right. But then just fell in love with that bike, and the memories made on that bike. And it's way too long of a story for now, but that bike kind of changed my dirt biking life, for the better, and so I've got a real connection to it. It's like one of my children. It's definitely my favorite bike, so it's my favorite 90s bike, just based on that. But I guess if you looked hard out, just thinking just your head, a 96 CR250 is probably my favorite. Just the whole thing, Jeremy, that season, the look of the bike, the way he looked, the whole
Oh
thing,
yeah,
and particularly his bike in particular, the way his bike looked,
yeah,
pretty hard to go
it was a great
past that.
bike.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I
also,
remember. Go ahead.
yeah, I've also got a real soft spot for his rival at the exact same time, like, or the following year, Fro's look in
Oh,
'97.
awesome
Um,
with the shift gear. Such a good look.
particularly because of the
Still
gear.
looks great. Still
That's
looks great. Yeah.
Fro's black shift gear. It's a toss up. Like, that's definitely my favorite gear of the '90s. Just love that. Like, I love black. A lot of my riding gear is black. Even though it's
Yeah.
hot, I just like it. Um, my all time favorite riding gear would be one. It'd be either one of RJ's or one of Bailey's setups from the '90s, from the '80s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, probably RJ's red, white, and blue.
That
Um,
was a great look in '86. Yeah,
where
great look.
one pant leg was red, one was blue.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Real.
USGP look. Yeah, that was an awesome
Yeah,
look for sure.
that's probably my favorite ever. But yeah, Froze as far as the '90s. So I really yeah, loved loved that era. Yeah, yeah,
My favorite
cool.
color for gear has always been orange for some. Like I actually love that orange
Okay.
gear that Fro rode in '97. He had the shift version of those orange. It looked so. I thought it looked great against that neon green. And
Yeah,
although the black was, I mean, every colorway in '97. I think that first year shift is really awesome. It looks great. The flow green, all of it's awesome. But I think my favorite gear of all time is probably I was a huge Bradshaw fan. I love Damon, and in '92 he had Axo gear. Actually, another soft spot. Like I was wearing this exact same outfit when I won my first race, and I had the Axo gear. I love that look with the gel print and everything in the early '90s, and that '92 Axo stuff was just. I think it still looks awesome now, and I love that stuff. I still have it upstairs in my underneath my bed. I wore the pants so much I wore a hole in them, and I just kept wearing them. They're awesome.
yeah.
That '90s stuff, obviously, if you put it on now, the jerseys are like a sweater. They're so thick.
That's
Those gel
so
prints,
thick.
they didn't
Yeah,
breathe. I mean, it was awful. Like, how do we not have a heat stroke out there in this stuff? And the pants are very thick and heavy and stuff. But I think as far as style goes, that was just an awesome era for gear. Fox in that era, the early '90s, with Doug Henry and stuff, looked great. And I love
mm.
that factory Honda stuff that Jeremy had in '96 was looked really great too. And they had like the whole Red Riders line that they're all
The big
wearing.
wings and all
Yeah,
that.
it looked
Yeah,
cool, man. I got one of those jerseys upstairs. I still have. It's with the wings going up the sides and stuff. It's just a
mm.
great look. It's iconic, and '96. It's hard to go wrong with McGrath and that CR for sure.
Yeah, that's right. What about '80s? What's your favorite '80s bike?
Oh man, probably
That,
the '87 CR250. That's a
yeah,
great machine, great
yeah.
bike. The only thing I hated about those was I roasted my calf on them, like the 125 and the 250. And before they came out with the low boy pipes,
Yep.
man, it would like if you were like squeezing the bike in through the whoops or something, it would like roast your inner calf. This is the days before they had the Kevlar on the boot or the Kevlar on the knee. You had that just like
Yeah.
leather inside. And I
Yeah.
remember just getting on a long race. I've had blisters on the inside of my leg from burning the crap out of it. So other than
Yeah.
that, those are great bikes. They did head shake. I don't know if you had a chance to ride those things, but they turned phenomenally. But they will shake their head like a wet dog, at speed. That's a little sketchy. I remember many times I've had literally had the bars ripped out of my hands, and basically been just hanging on for dear life with those things. They're a little nasty in that way, but they're beautiful bikes and great machines, I think, overall.
Yeah, like my favorite all-time bike, and definitely my favorite 80s bike is an 89 CR250.
Oh, that's a beautiful machine. Yeah.
That's my favorite. Like that, and that comes right back to when I was first, sort of, it was probably about 88 when I first started buying magazines. But then, because I love the old stuff, I was like, oh, back issues. And I started just going back issues. So I've got a lot of older stuff. But 88. So I was about, 12 years old. And of course, Rick Johnson was winning everything.
Oh, and my idol, absolutely.
Yeah. And I had the Rick Johnson video and everything. And then, seeing that 89 CR come out, and I can remember seeing going to so my local dealer, the Honda, but very small dealership, mostly sold farm bikes or the occasional XR. I remember going to the to a Honda dealer in the city, and the 89 CRs were lined up. They were lined up perfectly as you walk through the door, from the 80 through to the 500, and I was just like,
that's awesome.
And it burnt in my mind. I was like, I need to have one of these things, and I never got one, but I'm still planning on getting one. So
it's a great looking bike. I know I did a video on like the best looking, what my opinion was the best looking.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I think that CR is by far, the 89 CR is the best looking motocross bike I think they ever built.
Yeah. Just the everything just ties in perfectly. That different red, the font on the seat, the stickers on the shroud.
Yeah,
the first year upside downs, which were pretty awful. I think they were terrible forks, but they looked great.
They're awful. I don't know if you rode one like back then, but those forks were so terrible. Like I've never ridden anything quite as horrible as those forks. I think I remember a buddy of mine had one brand new, and it was it would blow through the stroke, and then modern bikes, if you you bottom out, but it doesn't ever give you that shock like those old bikes did. Those old forks would metal to metal, just
clang. Yeah, the clang.
It was like you could feel the clang, like metal to metal, and it would be so bad that you would bend the handlebars down. I'd see these little stress cracks in the handlebars from where it would bottom out so bad it would literally bend those steel bars, and it was just terrible. But very much like my 90, the 90 was a little better. But the motor was a rocket in that thing. The bike handled phenomenally, head shook like crazy, but turning and everything was phenomenal. But those forks were so terrible. It was just unbelievable how bad they were. It was really like the only thing that was wrong with the bike. Other than that, it was awesome. But
it's funny how you talk about the head shake with the Hondas. Like, sorry, I interrupted you there. Yeah,
no, you go ahead.
A lot of the older bikes, especially in the 80s, there was characteristics of each brand that just continued and never changed.
Yeah,
and
right.
Who was I talking? Might have been just last week's podcast with Randy. We were saying all the modern bikes are so good. There's little differences, but geez, they're all good. You can just about pick which color you like, and you're going to have a good bike. Whereas some of the performance gaps and some of the things that brands would just never get right for years and years,
right.
And that's it. Honda, every shootout in the 80s and 90s, Honda, great ergos, great motor, terrible head shake. Just the same thing. There's always about the head shake.
Yep.
Suzuki's always handled great, but didn't have enough power. It was just yeah.
I think bikes just in general had more of a quote unquote personality back then. You kind of knew what you were getting when you bought them. You knew the way a Suzuki would handle like a Suzuki, and Honda handled like a Honda. They had very distinct personalities, and it is surprising that Honda, and the weird thing about them with like their forks, like you're saying, for over a decade their forks were terrible. Pretty much from 88 They were the best forks in 86 and 87. They had this cartridge forks, and they
Yes.
were like way
Yeah.
ahead of everybody. And then
Yeah.
in 88, they still had them, but they made some changes to the damping settings, and it really just didn't work very well. But then when they went to USDs, they were awful, and they stayed awful until about 2000. I mean, for a decade, they were not very good. And they would switch back and forth between Kayaba and Shawa, and the frames change. I'm like, how is it possible? The only thing I could think of is maybe whoever was doing the testing maybe wasn't doing a good job. I don't know. It's weird because some years they'd say, they almost have the same fork that you'd have on a Kawasaki on a Honda, but yet the one on the Kawasaki worked better. How does that? It's just strange. They had their personality, and for some reason they had a hard time back in that era, kind of getting past those little things that held each brand back. But it definitely gave them a distinct personality.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, that's it. Like and especially like certain things like late 80s CR125s. The performance advantage to be on a red bike in that class in the late 80s was just like that was just it was like cheating to have a Honda 125 in that era.
Yep. Exactly.
And where nowadays any 250F you can you put a good ride on any 250F and they're going to win.
I think on any modern bike, I mean, look at Kinney. He's on that RMZ, which is essentially a 10-year-old design or more, and it's still competitive. It's funny you think now. I mean, I bet like my 2005 CRF 450, a good guy could probably go out there and win on it right now. I mean, it's like, you maybe have a little bit of like disadvantage because of the fuel injection, but in terms of power and performance, it's probably not. Like if a good rider got on it, it'd be fine, but you wouldn't get on in 1990 and get on a 1978 and have any hope of competing. It's like the bikes now, obviously they get better every year, but I don't think the leaps and gaps in technology and performance are like they were in the early days when they were, 1 year to the next. If you're on a 2-year-old bike, you're really at a disadvantage, where that's certainly not the case. You could ride a 10-year-old bike now, probably be just fine unless you're in the pro class,
That's right. Like the massive leap. There's a really good article. I think it might have been David Coombs. There's a really good article about, I forget it's even got a good catchy title, but it's basically about the progression of bikes from between like 76 and 86, I think is the era that he sort of captures as where the biggest progression happened and how much bikes changed. And, especially if you're talking, like, I mean, youngsters don't realize how big of a power, you think Honda's a powerhouse now with the Lawrence brothers. In the 80s, like once Honda hit their straps in the mid 80s, like that's just ridiculous. And that, they pretty much for that whole time period, Honda had a new machine almost every year. Probably every year. I'm just trying to think.
Almost every year. Yeah. It's insane to think about how quickly they were innovating. Like every single year, the whole model lines are completely revamped. New engines, chassis, everything. It's crazy. Like, now a bike. I mean, Kawasaki, look at a KX, and you're like, well, what year is that? You can't tell at the first glance. It looks like every one for the last 5 or 6 years most of the time. Where back then it was like a new bike every year.
Yeah. Like I've got some mates with I think between 3 mates, we've got a lot of the CR250s of the 80s, and like I have an 84. I've got a mate who has an 82 and an 83, and I've got a mate who has an 81, an 80, and a 79, and an 86. I think there's a couple of us in there, and every single one of them is completely different. There might be some bolts interchange.
Yep.
And that's about it, especially like my mate's 83 and my 84. They're completely reversed, that's when mine's the first with the right hand kickstarter. His is the last, so, and like from a distance, they sort of look similar, and then you get up and it's like, is there a mirror here? Like what's going on? They just changed everything. Everything over completely.
First year they went to the ATAC and added the disc brake and stuff. Yeah, you're right. They switched the drive around and stuff. They were completely revamping these bikes. Like the 84 CR500 is essentially like a 1-year bike. You
Yep.
know, they flipped the engine around, air cooling, and then the very next year they went to a liquid cooling. So
Yeah.
it's like almost none of those parts are interchangeable between the machines. You know.
Yeah. You can't fathom nowadays with the really slow cycle, that 3 year cycle that manufacturers do with
Yeah.
bikes, and even then they're for the most part they're pretty very conservative with the changes they make. Like the biggest excitement we've had in 20 years really was Yamaha's reverse in the
Yeah.
engine. That's the biggest one, and then fuel injection
Yeah.
um, was a
Electric
bit of a
start
game
is a nice
changer. Yeah,
deal. Yeah.
electric start. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's probably, you go back before then, it's probably alloy frames, maybe.
Yeah.
Would
Alloy
be the
frames
next
probably.
the
In
next
the
one
80s, it
before
was
that.
like the monoshock coming in and then liquid cooling. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a big thing. Yeah, it seems like most of the stuff now is more incremental, and honestly, I don't see any huge changes probably coming to motocross in terms of the design of the bikes until maybe unfortunately it goes to electric. You know,
yeah,
you can obviously get a little more power out of them and tweak the injecting and the ignitions and add some of those new electronics that certainly help. But I don't know the quantum leap of changes that was going on in the 70s, and it just won't ever happen again. I
nah,
have an
nah,
article where a dirt bike tested Marty Smith's 76 125 versus Mickey Diamond's 86 125, and
mm,
you would think those bikes were 30 years apart to look at
yeah,
them.
yeah,
But it was
yeah.
only a decade, which is, a decade ago, Ryan Villopoto was winning. It's not that long ago,
That's right. Yeah,
but now it's like, holy crap, this thing has got like 5 inches of travel and air cooling and no, I don't think, hell, it probably didn't even have a reed valve from the factory. Marty's bike probably did, but it's
yeah,
amazing the difference they made in just a short amount of time, how much those bikes changed.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You you like the '70s stuff as well, Tony?
I like I said, I didn't actually get into motocross until I was a little older because like so my parents were not into. I was not a mini kid or any of that stuff, so
Yeah,
I really
same
didn't
for me.
start following the sport until the early '80s. So the '70s bikes, I always thought, when I was racing in the '80s, I'd see guys riding them '70s bikes like in quote unquote a vintage thing. I
Mm,
laughed at them. I thought those things looked like clap traps, because
yeah,
they sound the air cooling sounds so ratty and stuff like that, but it's like everything. And the older I get, the more they appeal to me. I can appreciate them more, I guess. But yeah, the '80s really is where my heart lies in terms of where I fell in love with the sport and stuff. I didn't see any of those '70s races happen live. I didn't follow the racing then. Everything I know about it is from, watching videos or reading these old magazines I picked up over time.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm very much, the '80s for me as well. But I don't know. As soon as I got into it, I straight away had a passion for the history of it, and I used to watch On Any Sunday a lot, and
Oh, it's a great
I
movie.
had
Yeah.
this. So there was a few influences in that got me really keen. Like, so my dad wasn't into dirt bikes at all, but um, my mate at the so he my dad was friends with the local dealers, with the local dealer, and his son, who's a fair bit older than me. I went to school with my sister and that, and he always had bikes, so that sort of sparked my interest. I'd see him, riding his Hondas, riding XRs and CRs and things, and then also had just some. There were some guys that worked for my dad who rode dirt bikes, and they'd take me riding, and the dealer would take me riding and that sort of thing. And then there was also, I had this neighbor who was a really cool dude, still known today, really really cool dude, and he had a big collection of bikes and some vintage bikes, and he had old twin shock stuff, air cooled stuff, all that sort of thing, and he'd fire him up and he'd be wheeling up and down the street and all this sort of thing. And I'd be just this kid, just like, oh my God, this
That would
is
be
the
awesome.
coolest thing.
Yes.
I want to be this guy.
Right.
And then the first time I rode a two stroke, it was his RM125, an RM125B. And I was riding my XR80 around, we just had big backyards, and it was a new development. So
Same with
out the
us, just right in the backyard,
out,
basically.
out the back was just vacant lots,
Right.
vacant blocks. And and he came over on his RM125 and he goes, "Do you want to ride this?" And I took that for a spin. Probably never got above half throttle, but I could hear that tang to tang tang tang, and I could smell it and all this, and just and I just thought the tin tank and the twin shocks and all that was just so cool. And
Absolutely.
so I sort of very early on got a passion for the older stuff, and I've never really had a chance still to indulge in that with restorations or whatever, but I certainly intend to. I went and helped. I've got some old mates that race that, like 70s vintage, and I went and helped run an event a few years ago. So I was just helping with the track and sweep riding on a modern bike and that sort of thing, and that was one of the coolest things I've ever done. Like we camped there. It was just a natural terrain on a grassy hill. Your real old school vintage thing. Camped there. I remember I woke up in the morning and stuck my head out of my trailer, and there's a mint 79 CR250 just sitting there. And I was like, what a way to wake up. Like,
Absolutely.
Wow. Straight out of bed, talking to this guy about his bike, and just I grinned from ear to ear the whole weekend. So I do really do love that 70s stuff. Yeah. Super cool.
It's definitely one of those things that, like I said, I appreciate it way more than I did back then. Like I would love to pick up like a 78 or 76 RM250 or something, or like that old Elsinore. I'd appreciate it more now. I restored a couple of 83 480s, CR480s that I had a few years back, and that's probably the oldest bike I've had in terms of like going back to restore them. But even riding those things, it's pretty awesome. The only thing that's sketchy is the complete lack of brakes. It's a little terrifying on those bikes because they have they have modern power. They're still plenty fast, those old 500s, but they just don't stop. That was the biggest problem. You better grab whole handfuls of brake if you want to stop the thing. So.
The coolest thing
bikes are cool.
The coolest thing about those, or the coolest and the scariest thing about those big old two strokes with no brakes, is when they sort of do that big, so they sort of clear their throat under deceleration and they leap forward. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't ridden one, but like you can't, you back off early because you've got no brakes, and they're just like this, they're coming down. Then they'll do this like, tang, this one big tang, and they'll just shoot forward and just you're straight over the back of a berm. It's like you're not ready for that. They'll just, all this power will just launch in this one moment when you think the bike's supposed to be slowing down. Yeah, I'll always remember that. I got a chance to ride a KTM 495, and that was my experience on that.
Nasty fast.
It shot me over the back of a berm. Yeah.
Yes.
The power just obscene power. Like you can't even explain it, like never not wheel spinning, no matter what gear or what you're doing, like constant wheel spin, and still forcing your eyes back in your head and and the brakes felt like wooden is the way I would describe it. Like you pull in the leather. It was just
don't have the bite that you expect. Yeah.
Just like that, there's a block of wood between the lever and the bars.
Exactly right. That's exactly what it's like.
There's nothing at all happening here. So.
Yeah, there's many times where I holding on just a little too long. You're like, oh crap, I don't know if I'm gonna make this corner here. You're just like bearing down on them as hard as you can. It just doesn't have the modern bite that you get from a disc. It's you have to think ahead on those things for sure.
Yeah. So you're on the East Coast, Tony. Do you ever get to any of the big vintage meets or anything like that?
I've never been to any of the big vintage meets. Like the closest track to me is Budds Creek. I live outside of Washington, D.C. I've been to High Point. I've been to Budds Creek. I've been to, a few of the local races here, Supercross races and stuff. I've never been to any vintage racing. Are you big into going to vintage events?
Oh, look, the only really, really big one that happens in Australia is well north of where I live, and I got a chance to go there 2 years ago now, and that was pretty amazing. But now I'm very keen to one day get to the probably the ones that Scott Burnworth runs, the Carlsbad reunions and there's two or three different ones that he does. Yeah, I think that'd be really cool. And then also in England,
That's the one I
world,
want to go to. The World Vintage Motocross of
yeah,
Nations. That's the one I want to go to because that
that would
that looks
be,
like so much fun to see
oh,
all the guys you grew up worshiping out there, on these old bikes and stuff. It would be so cool to see them ride them again. See standing on some old CR 500 or something ripping around.
yeah, yeah. We were very lucky. So we had, is it 2 weeks ago now? We had the Melbourne Supercross, and Rick Johnson was there.
I saw that on social media. Yeah.
And he's one of his 80s, his actual 86 CR250s was there,
Yeah.
and he rode that out into the stadium and that sort of thing. So that was pretty cool, man. Like I was like I was 11 years old again, just staring.
Oh
Like,
shit.
even
That'd be
though he's an
awesome.
old guy, he was in a suit jacket, and that sort of thing.
Right.
Like,
Did you see the time they were?
he was dressed for the casino, but he was, he rode out and did an
Right.
interview and that, and I just thought, oh my god, this is just amazing. Yeah,
That's better that they trotted him out at Anaheim. I don't know, 10 years ago or so on a KTM. And
on
I
a
thought that was
KTM.
weird. Yeah, I guess he
Yeah,
was sponsored by KTM at the time. Yeah, I don't remember now, but I was like, wow, that's a
yeah.
weird look. He's got a
I
5
think
on a
he was.
KTM.
I think at that time he was doing KTM adventure
Probably
bike,
riding
because he
schools or
does a lot of
something.
adventure
Yeah.
bike stuff. Yeah, I think he
Just
might
seemed
have
like a
been.
strange look. I'm like, wow, that's weird. It's like you think KTM at least let him ride on an 86. It's not like you're going to buy a new 86 KTM. So, but whatever, it was strange. Right.
Yeah, yeah. Even thinking of KTM, man, like you couldn't explain to kids nowadays like how much of a small thing KTM was not that long ago. It's
Wow.
pretty
I had
amazing,
never
isn't
even
it?
seen one before the mid 90s. You never saw, at least in my area, I never saw one at the track. I never saw
Mm.
anybody riding one. It's like, it's one
Yeah.
of these things they wouldn't even always be covered in the magazines. The shootouts, a
Mm.
lot of years wouldn't even have a KTM in them. It's funny how far they've come from bankrupt in the early 90s to like the off road powerhouse they are today is amazing.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I knew of the brand was because of my neighbor who had the 495, and him and his mates were sort of they had a bit of a they were a bit like, they were sort of just into different Euro brands. Like, one of them had a Can-Am, another one had a Montesa. They were just sort of,
Mhm.
that was sort of their thing. They had, Hondas and Suzuki's as well, but they had some odd brands that was just, something that they liked, I guess. So I knew of that, but that you didn't really see them, and then, sort of like, you'd start to see like some of them. I always loved the look of the 1990 KTMs.
That's a great looking motorcycle. I love that look. That's one of my favorite KTMs of all
Yeah,
time. The
yeah,
Block
yeah.
Club replica one there, the red,
Yeah,
white,
yeah,
and blue.
with the red
Yeah,
hubs,
yeah,
and the
great
red,
looking
white, and blue.
motorcycle.
Yeah, they were a good looking
Yeah,
bike.
yeah, good
Um,
looking bike. How do you feel about the year after that when they went to the mint green?
I don't like it. Nah, like
I hate it. I
it's a lot
hated
of
it then. I
people's.
still don't like it now. Yeah, that
A
was a
lot of
weird look.
people
I don't know what
loved
they
it,
were
but
thinking.
I thought they you know that sort of red, white, and blue looked so good with the red hubs and all that, and then they went crazy. I mean, all the
Yeah.
manufacturers went crazy in the early 90s, didn't they? All
Purple.
like,
Speaking of the purple behind you, it's so
yeah,
funny. Every manufacturer had to have purple on their bike. It was like
they went
the
all,
95 Hondas. I hated the looks of those things. I thought they were ridiculous. It's
yeah,
at the time.
yeah.
Again, I can appreciate it now as kind of this kitschy thing of its era, but at the time, I was like, what are they thinking?
Do you
It was like the
remember?
strangest thing.
You remember the first time you laid eyes on a 91 RM? That
Oh
that
yeah,
was the
the first
biggest
time I
shock.
saw one. Yep, that was a stray. I remember a buddy showed up at our local track with one in the back of his truck, and I'm like, "What the hell happened?" Because I always thought the '89 and '90s are maybe one of the prettiest motorcycles
Beautiful,
ever. The
beautiful.
yellow and
Yeah,
blue, all
yeah,
mono. It's just a great looking motorcycle. And I'm
yeah,
like, "What is Suzuki doing?" I didn't even know what the theme of the thing was. It looked like a cat barfed on it.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
just the weirdest look. Even today, I kind of appreciate the 92 just because it's so crazy. With the 91,
yeah.
I'm like, I still don't know what the hell that was. It just not a great look in my opinion. But that was the first one that was really like weird.
It
And I
was
remember the
super
first time
weird.
it's
Yeah,
strange and like I guess they were just hoping they'd get more attention. I mean, I suppose they did,
they got that.
but
Yeah,
it was an ugly look. It was just weird. And I remember the first time I saw, I went to my local Honda dealer and they had the 92 CRs in stock. And I remember seeing that in person and thinking, what the hell? It was because if you ever saw those bikes in person, they don't really look like the 94s, 95s, they have that nuclear red, but it's not translucent. That
Yeah.
92, it was almost like a translucent color where the sunlight would kind of go right through it. It almost looked pink in the sun.
Yeah.
And it was this weird color, and you'd see them at the track, and they quickly turned like salmon pink if you left them out in the sun at all. So after about 3 months of riding, half of them like look, like some sun faded strange machine. I remember that was like, what is Honda doing? Everybody just had to get more attention. I guess it was a strange year for graphics and design for sure.
Yeah. I think so. Almost like it's like some new drugs just made it to Japan. Like the Japanese come up with some new hallucinogenic that just like it's like, hey, this looks good. I distinctly remember. So my childhood riding buddy, he came to school one day and he'd beaten me to probably the latest copy of Dirt Bike magazine, because you'd go down the shop, see it, well, they're not in yet,
Right.
and he goes, wait till you see the new RMs, and he's just shaking his head, and I'm like, what? And he wouldn't tell me anything. He goes, no, you wait, you talk to me tomorrow. And so I would have been straight. We call them the news agents, where you buy all the magazines,
Right?
Because they wherever they'd sell all the newspapers, they'd have the magazines. That's where you get them as well. So straight to the news agents. I wouldn't have even bought it yet. I would have just opened it up to have a look, and I was like, oh my god, what did they do? That's just because I loved those 89. 90 RMs. That was such a pretty bike. They're probably my
That was the worst part of it.
It
was such a beautiful bike before that. It wasn't like it went from sort of ugly to really ugly. It went from beautiful and classic to this weird thing. Like it's like they fired everybody in the design staff and let a bunch of 5-year-olds just go crazy with crayons.
That's right.
It's just so crazy.
It was probably a miss, But the funny thing is, if I see one nowadays, I really appreciate it. I was like, cool.
Yeah, you got to respect how bold they were, I guess. But again, at the time, I was like, man, that is hideous. I hated it. I thought it was awful.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the magenta Yamaha? Were they magenta over there in Australia? Same as here?
Yeah. We had some little differences. I'm trying to think now. I think we. How they sort of went from magenta to lavender. We went to one or the other early or late. So there's one model that differs. I think the
93. I think you guys kept
differs.
the magenta seat, and we got the purple seat here.
Yeah, something like that. But I didn't like it because I had an 86 YZ, and I loved the red and white. Well, to me, YZs were red and white, you
guys never had the yellow ones there, right? It was always red and white with the Yamahas?
Very early days, there was a few models, like you're going back to Tin Tank, you're going back to I think there was one of the YZ80s, like a YZ80D or E or something like that, real early there was a few yellow ones did get here, but for the most part, it was white. Yeah, they were white with a black seat and usually a bit of red on the stickers and that sort of thing. So there wasn't a lot of red until about the J. I think the J models started having a red seat.
Okay.
And 82 they had a red seat, and then a bit more. So they sort of got more of the red and white. But to me, that was red and white was what Yamaha was, and I loved the sort of especially sort of 88 through to 90 YZs. I love those bikes,
right.
Such good looking bikes, and I loved the red anodized forks on the 90. Some people didn't like it. I loved them.
I didn't like
you
that.
Don't like it. Yes,
I had an 88 and an 89 YZ125. They're pretty good bikes. The power band was narrow, but they were fun bikes to ride. But that 90, I never liked those anodized forks with the.
They were a love.
I always thought, man, this thing's gonna be pink in a year. I was always
and they were. They're all pink now, but
right.
And that was also, it was a cool era. That was when Bradshaw was exploding and and all that sort of thing. And then when they went to the magenta, I hated it then. Same. cool, really cool now, but
Yeah.
I kind of felt like Yamaha lost their identity for a while because they changed so much.
It
They
really
sort
did.
of
It was
went,
weird. They couldn't figure out what they wanted to be. Yeah, I hated in '95 when they went to the factory team did the deep blue look. I
yeah,
thought it was ugly. I was like, "This what the hell, blue Yamaha,
yeah,
weird." But you quickly now it's like, "Oh, I love it. It's great." You get used to it. At the
yeah,
time though, I think I'm just adverse to change. When they make some real
yeah,
drastic change, I'm like, "Oh, what are they doing?"
yeah. Well, they sort of eventually settled on blue, but that's sort of the period between the red and the white through to the blue. It's funny though. A lot of the race bikes looked better than the production bikes though too. Like
Yeah,
Bradshaw's 92 bike, and that looks awesome.
right,
All of Fro's bikes through that period. That Fro's bikes always look great.
right.
They tended to just tweak them a bit and just have them looking really really cool.
That
Um,
neon color was awesome. It's funny. Like in '96, they never had the works bikes weren't purple at all. They didn't have any of that stuff. They were
yeah,
totally green. You had that flow green look that was
yeah,
just looking. If you saw it in person, it was like day glow. It was so cool to see. It was a really great looking motorcycle.
yeah. It was super cool. Yeah. Now but like, what about for you when the 90 KXs come out? Because that was sort of the very
Oh
first
man,
one where things went
yeah.
crazy. That was the
I
start
think
of
they're
the
the one that I think we could blame them probably for most of the other crazy stuff that happened. 'Cause, they kind of broke the ice with that
didn't
first
they?
holy cow. Yeah, that was a bike that even though it was a drastic change when I first saw it, I mean, me and my buddies thought it was the coolest looking motorcycle we'd ever seen. I loved it. I thought this thing was so cool because
Yeah,
I had a Kawasaki in '87. I had a 125 at one point. I had an '89 at one point, and they were good bikes for what they were never great, but I thought they were pretty decent bikes. But they were always very boring looking. The 125 had the single sided radiator on it, and I always thought that was
very
weird.
understated looks, wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, it was very conservative. And
mm,
then that 90, man, it was like they swung for the fences. And I think in this case, they hit it out of the park. I thought,
yeah,
and I still think it's a great looking motorcycle. If you look at it now, you see one. Actually, my buddy Jamie has one. Some of the bike looks jumbo sized. Actually, the
mm,
frame is very large. The fenders are very wide. Like the rear fenders, like this wide. It's crazy.
yeah,
But at the time, it looked so avant garde, and that frame was so cool. It kind of looked like a street bike or whatever. And I thought that was a
mm.
really great, in terms of success and visually speaking, at least. I think that was a great looking motorcycle. Personally, what did you think when it came out?
Yeah, I loved it. That was definitely, there's hits and misses. That one was a hit.
Yeah, for
When those
sure.
90 KXs came out, they got the mixture of going a little bit crazy, but tastefully, I
Right,
guess. They didn't.
right.
And the pink and purple works with the green. It just
It does. It
it
looks much better than
works.
some of the other bikes. Yep,
I think the
for
purple
sure.
stuff on the green works, whereas I never really dug that when Honda put purple with the red. Sort of
It
just
doesn't. To me, it doesn't work. It's
doesn't
weird.
really
Yeah,
work as much.
yeah.
And that sort of thing. Even when Suzuki put a bit of purple on the yellow, I wasn't sure about that. I thought blue goes better with yellow,
Yeah,
but yeah, when it's all said and done, man, all that crazy '90s look though, yeah, I love it all.
it's cool. I mean, the
Looking
fun
back,
thing about it now is it has so much personality.
it
It's not
does,
like
man.
everybody's a cookie cutter bike and stuff. It has everything. They were definitely swinging for the fences visually, and love it or hate it, it made a statement. So
Yeah, that's right. You can't you can't easily distinguish a modern bike from a 5-year-old bike now, can you?
no,
Especially if
no,
it's got a graphics kit net on it. It's like,
yeah,
is that like last year's model, or is that like 5 years ago, or even 10 years
right,
ago? Sometimes if you see it riding past, you're not gonna know.
exactly. Yeah, my
Whereas,
2016 KTM, if you just look at it quickly, it looks just like a brand new one. They don't look
yeah,
that much different unless you get up real close. Oh, the shroud's a little different, or the stuff like that. But visually speaking, they look very similar. It's not like these
yeah,
huge changes anymore. It seems like to me.
yeah. Whereas you go to there's a reasonably good vintage racing scene of not of racing '90s bikes, '80s and '90s bikes where I live,
Right.
and you go to something like that, and people just know. They know what you see it go past. And it's like, oh yeah, that's an 87. Oh yeah, this
Right.
guy's got it. You can tell them just from a riding past. You can pick up on the
Sure.
little things. There's a few models that might blend. A little bit like my KX, that 94 to 98. If they stick it up,
Yeah.
it's a bit hard to tell because they did
Sure.
say quite similar, and some of the Yamahas stayed quite similar in that. But yeah, it's still there's a lot of little differences and little personalities where it's not nowadays. It's a lot of bold new graphics, as they say.
Right.
BNG bold new graphics. So that's cool. Yeah. The what about have you done much like vintage racing yourself? Have you drag any of your bikes out? Yeah.
I haven't. Like I've taken when I had those 480s, I took them to the track and rode them, but I never raced them. I was always afraid to hurt the darn thing. It's like I'd take it easy, and it was such a, especially when I was doing this, was in the early 2000s when I had these bikes, and like I blew up the transmission on one of them, and it turned into this utter nightmare to try and find a third gear for this bike. It's so old, and it was I guess is it's probably easier today to find stuff because of the internet and stuff. It's probably easier to find that kind of stuff. And vintage has become so big too. There are probably people making replacement parts for these things, even that weren't, like the old Hondas that all rotted out the friggin' water pumps. They probably figured out ways around that now. That was a real issue back then.
Yeah.
So I was always with my bikes. I had, I just had a 1990 CR250 I restored a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember.
I had it just to ride it and play around on it, but I didn't really want to. I was afraid to hurt the damn thing. I guess if you go into it thinking, okay, I'm going to race it, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to turn it into a garage queen.
Yes.
Maybe you don't feel the same way about it. But I was always like, I wanted to look beautiful, and I really hate to break it, so I never thought about racing one of those. I suppose it's probably fun if you're racing against other guys on similar bikes.
It is. It's really good fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
It's really good fun. You get that gate drop of 2 strokes.
Sure. Nobody has any brakes, so it's great.
It's cool. Yeah. Well, all of my all my stuff is disc brake. So
that's good. At least you have that. That's good.
But I do. I really want to get into the older stuff while I still can, because the 70s racing scene and that sort of around here, it's they really starting to struggle with numbers and just not enough people into it, and a lot of the guys that had bikes and have a passion for that era, they're getting too old to ride now, and they hang in there, but they're getting too old to ride. So I'd love to get a little bit involved with that. I've got a thing for old Spanish bikes, for Bultacos and Osses, which is
wow. I have never actually seen a Bultaco or a Ossa in person. I've seen them plenty of times in magazines, but I've never actually seen one at the track.
Yeah, now
are they hard to get parts for them now? I mean, they've
the Spanish stuff is actually not too bad. Yeah. Apparently, Ossos I'm not sure, but Bultaco parts it's not too bad. Yeah, there's a fairly there's a very devoted worldwide sort of devoted love of Bultacos, and so the parts aren't too bad, and the bikes themselves have held their value, a little bit less than like an Elsinore or an RM, of that same era, and so they're a little bit more affordable to get it for a start. But you're right about the internet with old bikes. The internet's made things easier to find. There's things like for my 84 CR, it's a long-term work in progress because I'm always too damn busy to get things finished, but it'll have parts from all over the world on it. There's one part that's I can't remember, but some European country, Finland or somewhere, I found like the last one in the world and all this sort of stuff. And I got that recommendation of where that part was from a guy in England. So you got to be prepared to put in the hard yards to.
I mean, that's part of the fun too, is finding
that
stuff.
Yeah.
And, when I did restoring that 90, same thing. I got a lot of stuff from Italy and You can, there's people that have old works parts that are selling them. You can find all kinds of trick stuff and things. It's kind of crazy the availability out there. But in the old days, you never would have been able to find any of that stuff, unless you knew. I remember when I was younger, calling around to local junkyards trying to find parts for stuff. It's like now
Yeah,
you type it into eBay or one of the swap meet places, and you can. It's so much easier to find that kind of stuff than it used to be.
Yeah, and there is some reproduction parts getting built and that sort of thing too, which does.
If there's enough demand, yeah.
Yeah, mate, once the demand gets up, it's especially the in my experience, the 80s stuff is probably easier sometimes than the 90s stuff because the demand's not quite there. Like power valve parts for my KX that's one of the reasons why I don't ride it so much anymore, because it was, I got some of the last ones in Australia and that sort of thing. And,
sure.
And I've known of people getting billet power valves custom made and all that sort of thing, but I haven't heard of anyone yet. They really need to reproduce them things, because those Kips valves and that they were all alloy, so they break and the teeth wear down and all that sort of thing, and that sort of thing. Especially the older bikes where they never, someone's owned it that's never cleaned the power valves.
Of course, yeah, right, exactly.
So you got to sort of, you maintain them, they're all right, but most kids that had a KX125 never did that. So
no, there's the joys of vintage, machines, cars, motorcycles, whatever it is. That's the problem, is finding the parts, and sourcing them is always a bit of a challenge, but it's also, like I said, part of the fun.
That's right. Do you have a favorite? Cover, magazine cover from your collection? This is probably a tough one.
That is a tough one. I'm sure if I had enough time, I could think of something. I mean, I will say, like, as I go through, because I looked at my magazines quite a bit. I'm always, like, when I'm doing a new article or something, I'm kind of rifling through them. I love the mid 80s motocross actions, when they'd have like a lot more race footage on there. Maybe something. There's one where, like, I have Ron Lachine on the cover on that RC 125, and it looks so cool. Probably something from the mid 80s, because now the magazines, even the ones that are still around, like Motocross Action and stuff, they all just have pictures of their test bikes. That's all they ever put on there, and they seem to put a lot more care into the photography and the editorial in the old days, personally. So it's probably something mid 80s, probably Motocross Action would probably be my favorite, something in that era.
Yeah. There's one that I always loved, and it's more from the wording than the picture. But it was Dirt Bike Magazine just after Anaheim 1990, and on the front of it, I remember just the front cover. It says Damon Bradshaw and the whole shot from hell, and I always remember that. And I've got it over in the collection there.
That whole shot was one of the ballsiest moves I've ever seen in my life. Because if he had not got there, he would have gotten blown into the cheap seats, because he was warped 10 around the outside. That was an insane maneuver.
I don't think I've ever seen that. I've seen like at an amateur race where you get one kid that's really good. I've seen a whole shot from the far outside, like that. But not, and I don't think I've ever seen that at a pro race where a guy's just from the far outside railed just the top of the berm at warp speed and come
just
around.
Didn't shut off.
It was amazing.
He was. I mean, he's inches away from getting pinched as he's exiting there. He just barely misses it, and it would have been an ugly crash. It was such a ballsy move.
I just wish that. I wish we had more angles and footage of that, because the
HD or something. Yeah,
the camera shots doesn't quite do justice till you rewind and you have a real good look at that. That's one of my favorites, and so it's sort of the wording on that cover, and then but there's some really good covers. So like growing up, we didn't have a big motocross scene. It was more of an off-road scene. So a fan of both sports, and and as a kid, it was just the same thing. They were just dirt bikes. One had headlight, one didn't,
Right.
And Dirt Bike Magazine, some of the doing crazy things on inappropriate bikes, like there's Dirt Bike Magazine covers where they're just launching the shit out of an XR 600 or something, Jim Holly, on an XR 600. There's some really, really cool things like that.
Yeah, there's one in dirt bike where somebody, I don't know if it's Jim but somebody's launching an XL 600 over a road jump over like a Porsche 911 or something. Things like
Yes,
20 feet in the air. I
I
actually
think
had
that
one of those
is.
bikes, and I think
Yeah,
that thing must have broken half when he landed because, good Lord.
I think that is Jim. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, and the best one is Jim jumping there
Harley?
was Electra
Oh,
Glide
yeah.
Harley.
Yes. He was that guy's crazy still to this day. He's crazy.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I was I was always a big Jim Holly fan. Just
Yeah.
really because he was the guy. He was the guy
Yeah.
doing that crazy stuff. And then a bit later years, I'm always a big Rich Taylor fan because he was
Yeah.
doing the crazy stuff in Dirt Rider.
He's got such
Uh,
great I saw so many great photos of Rich, in that era when
yeah,
he was test riding for them and stuff.
and it's really cool. Both those guys ended up doing stunt work in
I know, right?
in movies. Yeah, so
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. So obviously that craziness led them to do that. So yeah, that's
Have you ever seen a video called that Gary Bailey did called Pros at Practice and Play? It's on my YouTube channel, but it
that
came out. I remember it came out in '89, and it was like the very first video I saw where I was like mind blown by some of the crazy stuff. It has Bradshaw. He hits this road jump, and he must jump 200 feet on a YZ250. It's got some really insane stuff. That's like the first like quote unquote freestyle video that was out there.
okay?
And
Yeah,
there's just some insane stuff in that old video. I was like, it just blew me. You watch the guys race and you think, oh, that's pretty awesome. But when you see some of the insane stuff they do when they're just playing around, it's just like, oh my God, these guys are complete lunatics.
yeah. There's a good chance I have seen it. I can't remember that one. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the first time I saw any sort of huge things like that was um, you'd remember the video Rick Johnson Profile of a Champion.
Oh yeah, I have that one. Yeah, I have it on
Yeah,
YouTube,
I have it. When I was a young fellow, I probably could have recited every single word from the whole movie,
for sure.
And the scenes where he's, I did know the location. I think it might have been at Hondaland. I think that huge downhill jump. He jumps
Yes,
up the hill and jumps the
something
huge
Canyon
downhill.
or something. I can't remember what
Yeah.
it's.
There's a
Yeah,
particular name. Yeah.
yeah.
And that sort of thing. And that's the first time I saw that. And I just thought that's just,
Just
unbelievable.
launching off that chasm.
Yeah.
It's like, holy Christ. Dudes are insane.
Yeah. No, that was the first thing I saw of that. Yeah. That nah.
Well, if
The
you watch some of
what
those old races, those guys are so crazy because the jumps didn't have like landing ramps hardly. They, when they were first kind of figuring that whole Supercross thing out, it was really just who had the biggest balls because the jumps were not well designed at all, and the
no.
bikes weren't set up for that. You can see how, you watch the race and you see how soft their suspension is. It's just like going all over the place. It's amazing what those dudes could do on those bikes. They just weren't really designed for that. They hadn't kind of figured it out. But it's amazing if you look from a race in '85 to a race in 1990, how a 1990 track looks a lot more like what we race today.
Yeah.
And how much it changed in just those 5 or 6 years. With the bikes and everything else, it's amazing how quickly that ramped up, and how hard it must have been to ride those. Like you get on your '84 CR250 and take it on a a track like that. It's insane that they didn't just all kill themselves.
It is, yeah. It is. It's cool. Like the you could see the different styles and the riders were trying. They talk about modern times where riders have different styles. The different styles back then, like you compare Bob Hanna's style to David Bailey's style. Like you can't.
They're not even riding the same sport almost.
It's not a different sport. That's it. Like you got one guy who's literally wide open with his feet flapping off the back like a flag.
Pinning it everywhere. Yeah.
And then you got another guy who looks like Bailey was doing things. Obviously slower and
Jet
that sort of
Lawrence.
thing. He was doing Jet Lawrence
now.
stuff.
Yeah.
The things those guys are doing, that's what David Bailey was doing in 1983. So
right.
And then him and Ronnie, like the dogger, like man, that watching Ronnie on his 85 125, that is some of the smoothest, most precise, beautiful riding, just about you could ever see.
Yeah.
That Ronnie was sort of like that sort of Jet Lawrence style and that sort of thing. And
yeah, it was at the time I was amazed. He'd like stand up everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how does he do that? He'd like, you go through corners and wouldn't sit down, and it's kind of like a Stefan Everett's kind of style. And it's like, it was amazing. It kind of blew your mind back then. You're like, how the hell does he do that? Some of those guys just had so much talent. That's a guy, obviously, if Ronnie had the drive of, Ricky Johnson, he probably would have been, Jim McGrath. He probably would have killed everybody.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Unfortunately, I think sometimes the guys that it comes easy to, it's hard to get. They don't have to work as hard, so it doesn't always work out. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean that's why, like, RJ and Wardy, they just worked so hard.
Right.
That's why those guys ended up. They obviously obscene skill, but they had to work so hard.
Sure.
And I remember, I've heard countless RJ interviews, of course, because he's been here on that.
He loves to talk about himself. That's true.
About how he would he was just prepared to hit things harder, and he was just strong enough to hang on. Was part of his that was part of his MO. It was like, my suspension. I remember him even talking about the early upside down suspension. It was pretty harsh and pretty terrible, but I was just strong enough and willing to just hit things hard.
It worked well for him because he just smashed into things.
Yeah, that's right, and he could
just hit it harder.
Could hang on, and then a guy like Wardy, a little guy, who was a master of a KX 500, just
all those guys were like triathletes and stuff. They were just like fitness nuts, and it's just a different era. Wardy was awesome to watch too. It is amazing to me that the littlest guy was so good on that KX 500. It's cool to watch him. I'm glad I got to watch him, live. At Bud's and a couple times before he retired, and it's just awesome to watch how great he was on that motorcycle.
Yeah. Do you still go to Bud's pretty regularly, or?
Not every year. My problem is my job is the weekends are tough to get off. So
of course,
they really screwed me when they moved the races from Sundays to Saturdays. Man, I was so pissed. I was like, man, come on now. Because at the time I was off Sundays, but Saturday is like our most important day, so it's always difficult to get off. So I don't get to go every year. If I can fit it in my schedule, I love to go. But unfortunately, I have to take time off from work to do it, so it's always difficult. And because I'm the boss, so it's also hard to get off for that. So it's difficult.
Yeah. I can't imagine, man. So I'm the boss, but I don't have any employees. So
there you go. That's even better.
When I take time off, I don't have to worry about what's happening in the business because it's not running. But
there you go.
But I do have to worry about catching up afterwards. So.
Sure, exactly. That's either way. Even if I take off, I got the same problem. Always a mountain of something to do when you get back.
Yeah. Very, very, very good. I think I've probably taken up enough of your time. Talking a bit of bench racing. Been super great fun, man. Super great fun. I've got one other, or a couple other little questions that I ask a few random questions at the end of the show. What's on your moto bucket list? So you mentioned going to like Fox Hills, and that sort of thing.
I think that would be number one. Yeah, my wife keeps telling me I need to take off time next year and go to Fox Hills. I think that's definitely on my moto bucket list because I would just love to go to that event. I think I would just have so much fun there. I think that's probably the number one thing I haven't done that I like to do.
Yeah, when you go, you're gonna do a video of it and that sort of thing because it'll be really
hell
cool.
Yeah, I'll put it on my channel and stuff for sure. There's so much cool stuff.
Do a thing. Well, I think did Steve Mathis go this year, or was he talking about?
I think he did go this year. I'm pretty sure he did.
I think he was talking about wanting to go back and ride it. So there you go. You
Mathis is, he was not riding at all a couple years ago, but he's really all in now. He's riding his bike all the time. So
yeah, Kiefer got him into it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Chris has a way of doing that. Yeah, Chris is very convincing.
Yeah, that's the way. Yeah. Yeah, cool. And I've got a few. I'm just thinking which question we'll ask Tony. I've got a few weird questions there. What's your spirit animal? Do you have a spirit animal?
Oh wow, tiger. Because they used to call me Tony the Tiger when I was a little kid. So there you go.
That's it. Was that were you a bit of a feisty kid?
Yes, what my dad called me. Yeah, getting into trouble.
That's the way. Did you have red hair when you were a young bloke?
I did. It's all gone
yeah.
gray now, but I had red hair when I was young. Yes.
Yeah. So that makes sense if you're a bit of a tiger.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. And what else? Maybe one more. Oh, who's your celebrity hall pass? Who's your? So if Mrs. Blazier gave you a hall pass, who's that? Who's your?
That's a damn good question. I think who's the girl who played Veronica Mars. I know I have the hots for that girl. God, what is her name?
I can think of the show.
She's blonde. I know she was on the Good Life or whatever. I can't think of what her name is off the top of my head. But yeah, every time I talk about her, she knows I got a thing for her. So
Veronica Mars. Yeah, no worries. I can picture the show and I can picture her face, but
what's her name?
I don't know what her name is. So yeah, I know my wife was my wife loved that show. So yeah, she
yes.
Anytime I'm watching TV, it's almost always something to do with dirt bikes. So but my wife watches a lot of series, and yeah, she was big on Veronica Mars for a while there.
Yeah, she was Sarah Marshall, and who's forgetting Sarah Marshall, but I can't remember her name. But anyway.
Yeah. No,
it'll come to me 5 minutes from now. I'll be like, oh, I
remember that. That's all right, man. Hey, give us your best Aussie accent.
G'day, mate.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good.
That's not a knife. This is a knife.
That's Crocodile Dundee. I reckon, it's the best so far. Like, we started this. One of my mates who was on an early episode, he suggested to ask any of the US guests to give an Aussie accent. So,
I love the Aussies, man. I was a huge Chad Reed fan. I love you guys. I'd love to go to Australia. It's one of the places I've never been in my life. I've been to Europe several times, but I'd love to make a trip to Australia. So, it always looks like one of those things on my bucket list to get out there at some point.
Yeah, well, I'm making my first trip to the US in
really?
less than a month. I'm going to Anaheim 1. So
I would. I've never been. That's another one I'd love to do. I've been to many Supercrosses, but I've never made it to Anaheim 1, and I'd love to do that as well. That'd be a lot of fun. I've gone to the season finales plenty of times, but Anaheim 1 is so cool with all the new bikes and new teams and everything. It has a different vibe to all the rest of the races. So I hope you have a great time. I'm jealous.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan and been a little bit involved with Main Event Moto with Daniel Blair's show, and the fans of that show were having a bit of a get together at Anaheim 1. So
awesome.
That'll be pretty cool. So there's I've made some really good friends as with other people that follow Daniel's show, and they're from all over the United States, and there's quite a big bunch of us all sitting together at Anaheim 1. So that'll be pretty cool. And while I'm there, I'm gonna want to get around, just all take in as much of the SoCal moto scene as I can.
There's so much to see there. Yeah, I go to Pro Circuit and Glen Helen and everything. There's so much cool stuff in that area. It's like the heart of the industry. So
it is, man. Yeah, it is. It is really it's the heartbeat of motocross in the world, really. So when you say, I was explaining to my dad a little while ago, because he doesn't, I've always been into it, but he's never really been into it. But we got talking about dirt bikes, and I was explaining to him how the Japanese will send a dirt bike to California for testing, and get feedback on a new model, and the testing will be done in California, not in Japan, for a Japanese brand. And he was really surprised by that.
Yeah, it's weird to think that Joe Shimoda is like one of the greatest Japanese riders ever. He's actually competitive here in the U.S., and it's amazing to think that all those bikes are built there, yet most of the riders are not world caliber. You have Watanabe and a few guys that over the years that have been really, really good, but it always was amazing that they send all their stuff for development here, because the riders, I guess, are a little faster.
Goes right back to an article in an old magazine here that I've read it lots of times because I love the story about the Jones family developing the YZ, the first YZ. Like Papa Jones cutting up the cutting up an MX 250 for Gary to ride, and changing
like
everything
I
on
think
it.
he had like a really modified DT, the old enduro bike.
Yeah, it might have even been
hacking
before,
it to bits and turning into
cut
a
up the
motocross
frame,
bike.
cut up the frame, cut up the swing arm, cut up everything. They cut up the tank and made a fiberglass tank and all this sort of stuff. That's a great story, and sent the details back to Japan of how we made this bike a race winner. So
Right.
and all that done in California. So yeah, it is super cool, man. Super cool.
Well, hope you have a good time. Hope you have. I'm definitely jealous. It sounds like a good time. It was Kristen Bell. That's the girl I was thinking of. Kristen.
Oh, there you go. Yes.
Finally came to me.
Yeah.
All those concussions catch up with you over time.
You've had a few.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, I raced for like 30 years, so I've been knocked out half a dozen times or more. Who knows?
Yeah. I've had three, and they're the things that worry me more than anything else. Like, I'm not.
For sure.
I got lots. I got some bent and twisted body parts like we all do.
Me too. Yeah.
And I'm not worried about any of that physical stuff. Yeah, people say, oh, you'll get arthritis in those joints and all that. Yeah, whatever. I wouldn't change it for the memories. But the head knocks is the one that worries you because of later in life.
Thankfully, I haven't had them in a long time. I had them all when I was younger. But yeah, the problem is you worry about the CTE and some of these other things catching up with you later in life, Alzheimer's or whatever. It's like, unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it now. But
no, that's right.
I wouldn't turn back the clock. I had such a great time doing those things, But the older you get, the more I think I really don't want to try that because I don't want to hit the ground anymore. It's like that becomes priority number one, not to crash. So
yeah, it does, man. Like I ride a lot. And I just love it. I could never stop because it's like oxygen. It's like oxygen for me. It's just part of who I am. But yeah, man, like I just don't. I don't take risks. I don't take risks. I can't. Like I got a family to feed. So
right.
And I mean, there's always is a risk. But I just even if I race, I'm never going to win a race anyway. So if I don't take a risk and I'm 20th instead of 15th, well, it doesn't really matter at all, does it? As long as I'm smiling, so yeah.
When I ride, it's just for the fun of it. It's like, my number one priority is to be able to go to work tomorrow and be able to ride the next time. So you want to make sure you just have a good time, but my pride is not hurt by the fact that I don't want to jump that double. It's like, when you're 18 or whatever, your buddies will goat you into that. Now I'll be like, no, you go ahead.
There's no.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
It's one thing, when you get older, you don't get sort of, the peer pressure doesn't work when you're an old guy, does it? It's you go ahead. Say whatever you can say whatever you like, mate. I ain't doing that. Like, that's not my bag. I'm not. Exactly. I'm not interested in that at all. So whereas when
some would call that wisdom. Yeah, exactly.
It is. That's what it is. Yeah, that is wisdom. Cool, man. All right, we might wrap it up. Now. How I close up the show, I don't know if you've seen it before, but I do a little sing along. So if you, if you, there's definitely no peer pressure here.
Okay,
but if you know the words to the chorus of Kenny Rogers' "The Gambler," feel free to jump in at the end there.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm familiar with the song. I don't know if I know the lyrics that well, but okay, we'll go.
That's all right. So I handed him my bottle, and he drank down my last swallow. Then he bummed a cigarette and asked me for a light. And the night got deathly quiet. And his face lost all expression. Said, if you're going to play the game, boy, you got to learn to play it right. You got to know when to hold 'em.
To fold 'em. Oh.
Know
when to hold 'em.
Know when to walk away. Know when to run. You never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting.
When the dealing's done, I think.
That's it. Good job, man. Good job. That's the way. A lot of people don't even have a go. So I'm just a guy that likes singing. And so what happened, man? The very first episode, I forgot to organize an outro, and so. Just being a bit of a loose unit I am, and I like singing, and now I just winged it, and I just chose that song and ran with it, and it became a bit of a fun thing to do. So
I'm certainly familiar with the song, but I was like, I don't know don't know the exact lyrics, but okay. Close enough.
That's all right. It's just for fun, man. Thank you, Tony, very much for joining the show. We'll have to do this again one day. There's always a lot of vintage bench racing to do. So thank you very much for your time. And thanks for anybody that's listened. Cheers.
Cheers.